freedom, which I happen to be reading. Again, thank you very much, Timothy Snyder, for being here. Well, let's talk about this because, you know, an interesting development that may have changed the calculation a little bit today is that we found out that Trump, our would-be strongman, is in a sense answerable to a bigger strongman, not Vladimir Putin, Elon Musk, who also allegedly, at least according to reports, has lots of conversations with Putin. What does that do to the calculation on how Americans should deal with Trump?
Yeah, I think that's a very good place to start. I wrote a piece a few weeks ago called The Submission Chain, where I tried to explain that voters might like Trump, but Trump is submissive with respect to Musk, and Musk in return is submissive with respect to Putin. So if you vote for Trump, you're voting for the little guy who admires a bigger guy, who in turn admires a still bigger guy. And that's what we've got now. We've got this cluster of oligarchs, some domestic, some half domestic, some foreign, who are the real power in our country. So in terms of how to resist, I think you have to start by doing what you were doing in the last segment, which is name it for what it is, which is an international oligarchy.
And I think that's a great point. And once we've now identified that it is international, and I am always trying to sort of get folks to focus outside the United States to see how these oligarchs interact and how these autocrats interact, whether it's Malay in, you know, Argentina or Maduro in Venezuela or Trump or, you know, in Hungary. They sort of interact with one another. How might we expect Donald Trump, now that he's got this oligarch on his back, essentially Elon Musk, how might we expect him to operate to still project power domestically and not lose face?
Yeah, that's another great question. I mean, because we're now past the reality show, which is the election, and we're into something which is a little bit more like reality, which is going to be Trump's next time in office. And in reality, Trump doesn't have money and Musk does. In reality, Trump can issue threats, but Musk can enforce them. In reality, Musk is the person to whom Trump owes debts, and that's going to become much clearer as time goes on. So I think we're in a moment where not only Trump's prestige, but actually the nature of what the presidency is really in question.
You know, it's interesting because it does remind me of what Ukraine essentially was, right, before it was liberated and it was in its present form. It was essentially a duchy of the Kremlin, and it was a separate country technically, but it kind of answered to another country. I do want to go back to something that we've been repeating a lot. It's something that you said first, and it was do not obey in advance. In retrospect, all of the people who've been bending the knee to Trump, running to Mar-a-Lago, including the Prime Minister of Canada, it now seems a bit absurd that they've been running to try to appease Trump as if he's the boss man, when it turns out, as you said, he's the littler boss man that answers to much bigger bosses.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny in your last segment, the idea now that the Republican Party is the party of two daddies. You know, that's where we've ended up, or three if you count Putin. I can't help but just refer back to what you said about Ukraine and Russia. Like, that's the part of the world I work on, and it is really striking that we seem to be reliving the Russia 1990s, where you have an aging, ever less competent president surrounded by oligarchs who are really making the decisions, even with respect to who his successor is. Personally, I don't think it's stupid for J.D. Vance to be really quiet right now, because the less he's visible, the more plausible he's going to be, and the sooner it's going to be that he's plausible as a successor to Trump. So I think he's actually playing this pretty smart, staying away from all of this nonsense. And then, as you say about Ukraine, the crucial thing in getting from an oligarchy back to a democracy is for the population to organize horizontally and resist. That's what the Ukrainians were actually able to do, and that's how they got themselves out from under this thing that we're moving towards, namely a Russian-dominated international oligarchy.
And how do we do that? Give us some steps.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing, like we said, is to name it for what it is. The second thing, and you've been doing a great job of this, is not treat them as heroes, to treat them as flawed human beings. The third thing is to look for alternative centers of power, like countries abroad or individual American states or American cities that can do their own thing, but can also make life harder for oligarchs. The fourth thing is to recognize what this is all about. It's all about turning the government into a way to make individual people rich. And that, as we have seen, like, once you realize that, not all Republicans are going to go along with that. I mean, some of them may have principles that we don't agree with, but they're nevertheless principles. Like, for example, the United States of America should exist as a sovereign country. If you let Musk and oligarchs like that take over, you won't have a sovereign country anymore. Congress won't matter. Even the Supreme Court won't matter. And this, I think, it's been clarifying the last few days and hours. This has been clarifying.
It has been so clarifying, including the fact that, in a sense, some of these Tea Party Republicans might wind up being a kind of resistance to the things, even though we may disagree with everything else they believe in. If they don't believe in a foreign-born oligarch taking over the United States, you never know what kind of weird alliances could happen. Timothy Snyder, so valuable. Thank you very much. Really, really appreciate your time.